Hey, what's up everyone, it's Justin here, and today I've got another comparison for you. This time it is the Samsung Galaxy S5 versus the Samsung Galaxy Note 3. Both these phones obviously coming from the same company, but do fit into different categories in the consumer market. The S5 fitting into the standard consumer market as Samsung's flagship, and the Note 3 fitting into the phablet market, a growing market that has shown much promise over the past few years. And although the Note 3 did come out in September of last year, of course when the next generation Note 4 comes out, I'll be comparing that once again with the Samsung Galaxy S5. And of course, coming from the same company, you'll definitely notice quite a few similarities throughout the device, both in the hardware and software sectors. However, you will also see some differences along the way. On the inside of the S5, you've got a Snapdragon 801 processor clocked in at 2.5 GHz and 2 GB of RAM, and on the inside of the Note 3, you've got a Snapdragon 800 processor clocked in at 2.3 GHz and 3 GB of RAM. So I'm sure you could see here that both these phones present some beastly specs, and you should definitely expect a lot in terms of performance. So without further ado, let's get right into this comparison. The first category we're going to look at is the hardware, and coming from the same company, of course you may know by now that Samsung has preferred to go with a plastic material. On the Note 3 though, you do have a different sort of texture. It is kind of a fake leather texture to it, but it is plastic. And you can see that through the stitching that goes around the edges and the texture that goes throughout the back, and personally I actually really like that, and I had a feeling that it was coming to the S5. However, on the S5 you do have a plastic perforated texture instead, which supposedly gives you better grip of your device. And for the owners of the S4 and S3, you definitely know what I'm talking about, and I'm sure you appreciate that. When it comes to the thickness and weight of these devices, the S5 comes in at 8.1mm thick and 145 grams, while the Note 3 comes in at 8.3mm and 168 grams. But I would definitely tell you that from my experiences, both devices feel really thin and light in the hand, and I actually really like that. Looking at the bottom, of course on both these devices you have a micro USB port. In fact, they both support USB 3.0, which is able to give you some faster syncing and charging speeds. On the Note, you also have the S Pen located on the bottom. You may also notice a port cover on the bottom of this device, and that is because it is IP67 rated, which Samsung advertises as dust and water resistant. However, if you look into the certification of IP67, this device is waterproof at 1 meter for up to 30 minutes. On both these devices, you're also able to remove the plastic back piece, which reveals your battery as well as your micro SIM and SD card slot, which by the way, the Note 3 is able to support up to 64 gigs in additional storage, and the S5 being able to support 128. Which I definitely find extremely handy, and I'm sure a lot of people will use, because as you know, the operating system and pre-installed apps on Samsung phones definitely take up quite a bit of space, and with the ability to do 4K recording in video mode on both these phones, I'm sure a lot of people will want to have additional storage to store that. On the back of the S5 located below the camera, you've also got a heart rate sensor, which some people may use and others may not, but Samsung really encourages people to use that in conjunction with their S Health as well as their Gear Fit devices. However, if you did check out MacMixing's video, it was pretty much deemed a gimmick. On the S5, you also have a fingerprint sensor that allows you to unlock your phone and sign into the Samsung accounts. When it comes to the display, I'm sure the first thing you will notice is that there is quite a big difference in terms of the size. On the Samsung Galaxy S5, you've got a 5.1-inch 1920 by 1080 resolution 432 ppi display, and on the Note 3 you have a 5.7-inch 1920 by 1080 resolution 386 ppi display, and both of these are Super AMOLED, so you're going to get some really rich and deep colors, giving you a nice vibrance throughout. But although there is a difference in terms of the ppi, I will tell you that you will not notice a difference whatsoever, and the only reason why the ppi is a little bit higher on the S5 is obviously because there are more pixels being packed into a smaller surface area with a smaller screen. Samsung has been really known for having their displays very vibrant, high saturation, contrast, all the colors just jump out at you, and that is thanks to these Super AMOLED panels, and I know some people may prefer that and others may not. However, I will say that the display in terms of the color representation on both these phones are really similar, if not unnoticeable in terms of the differences. Moving on to the software, both these devices have Android 4.4 KitKat, and of course with Samsung's TouchWiz UI skin. Also, one thing to note is that there is a high possibility that the S5 will come in a Google Play edition. We'll have to wait and see. However, with the S4 we did see a Google Play edition from that, which has stock Android. Starting out with the Samsung Galaxy S5, of course it is very snappy, as you would expect out of its 2.5 GHz Snapdragon 801 processor. Moving on to the My Magazine, which is located to the left of your home screen, just like where Blink Feed is located on HTC. It is pretty much a news feed, and it allows you to select the different topics or social media platforms you may be interested in and want displayed on your My Magazine. In the app drawer, of course, pretty familiar here, nothing has really changed here. However, on the top, you do have some of these settings in terms of downloaded apps, hide apps, stuff like that, but you will notice on the Note 3 the interface is slightly different. And of course with Android comes quite a bit of customizability, so in order just to customize your home screen, for example, just pinch in, you can change your wallpaper, widgets, and home screen very easily. That is pretty familiar. Moving on to your notification tab, you could tell that Samsung has kind of cleaned up the look of it, tried to have a little bit of a flatter look to the overall interface. You still have all of your quick toggle settings. We are all pretty used to that if you're a previous Samsung user. And you can also edit that by tapping the edit button, of course, and picking what apps will be displayed on your notification tab in terms of quick toggle settings. And of course, you also have your brightness slider there. So going into the settings, there's quite a bit of a different look here as well, and Samsung has gone with a kind of rounded icon layout, very colorful, and some may argue that it is kind of hard to find your way around, but putting it in list view, it makes everything pretty easy to find, and you also have the option to search for it on the top if you're looking for anything in particular. So I think visually they have done a good job at that. By holding on your home button, it will take you directly to Google Now from anywhere, and by double tapping it, you're able to access S-Voice, which personally I really never used. They've also changed the menu button into a recent apps button that allows you to close all your current running apps, and by holding on the back button for a few seconds, they will take you to your multitasking options such as multi-window, which I actually use quite a bit on the Note 3, taking advantage of the real estate. However, on this, it still works very well, and you're able to kind of rescale your different windows that you have added and add new ones from the sidebar. But I definitely think that it is a handy feature, and I'm sure a lot of people will be wanting to use that on the S5 or the Note 3 in particular, taking advantage of its screen real estate. But aside from that, that is a look at the Samsung Galaxy S5. On the Note 3, however, a lot of things do seem very similar, as this is still running TouchWiz, just like the S5. However, some things in terms of the visual side of things do look a little bit different. Going into our app drawer, it is kind of the same layout, and you also have your apps and the widgets that you could switch between the tabs on the top. And going into your settings, you just need to tap the menu button, which on the S5 of course was the 3 dots on the top right corner. And to customize the home screen, you just need to hold down on the screen and you can add and remove apps and widgets. Moving on to our notification tab, a lot of things do stay very familiar. Of course, you have your brightness control and also your quick toggle settings, though on the S5 they do look a little bit different. Again, you can also edit those by tapping on the edit button and switch those around depending on which ones you would want on your quick toggle settings. Going to our settings, you can see that they have a much different look actually. Instead of the rounded, colorful icons, they have kind of these different tabs and you can navigate between them, but I guess some people may have found it a little bit hard to get their way around. But personally, I didn't really mind the settings tab on the Note 3, however, I did like the visual side of things that they have done to the S5. So navigating back to the home screen, I'm just going to show you guys what each button does. Of course, you have your menu button. By holding that, it'll show S search, and by holding down your home button on the Note, it doesn't take you directly to Google Now, but your recent running apps, as well as another tab for Google Now by itself, and also your running applications, and just to close that to free up the RAM. The function of the back button is the same. It'll take you to your multitasking, or the multi-window in fact, and like it was on the S5, you pretty much just drag an application onto the screen or 2 applications and you can resize it around and run them both at once, and that really takes advantage of the screen real estate on the Note 3. So one of the more prominent features of the Note 3 is the S Pen, and I'm sure a lot of people purchasing this phone will be using that. And right when you take it out, or when you tap the button on it while hovering over the display, it will bring up your air commands, and by hovering you can pretty much scroll through the different options in the air commands, such as Action Memo, Scrapbooker, Screen Write, S Finder, and also Pen Window. So with the Action Memo, you can pretty much just write down words and different commands and it'll pretty much go by that. Personally, I don't really use that at all. And there's also Scrapbooker and also the ScreenWrite, which pretty much takes a screenshot from where you are and allow you to draw over it. And when I brought this to school, people had a lot of fun using this for drawing, whether it's taking pictures and drawing over it, being a little bit creative with that. And there's also Pen Window, which allows you to draw a space on your screen and select from a range of applications that you would like to run within that space. So I think it's great that Samsung has really tried to take advantage of the screen real estate on the Note 3. And with the Pen Window, you were able to kind of navigate the size around, whether it takes up too much space or you want it a little bit bigger. And when you close it, it'll just be in a small little window while you still navigate around your screen, and you can bring it up whenever. But in general, as you would expect from both Samsung devices, they have a pretty similar experience. However, some may prefer the visual things that they have done to the S5, while others may want to really take advantage of the S Pen, in which you would want to go for the Note 3. So now let's go ahead and talk about the camera. Of course, cameras are a very important part of consumer smartphones nowadays, mainly due to the convenience factor, and I'll tell you that both these phones have some amazing cameras both in the video and photo sector. Obviously, with Samsung going by the bigger the better theory, and each generation seems to go up slightly in the megapixel count, which I really don't mind. On the back of the S5, you've got a 16 megapixel camera that is capable of recording 4K video as well, and a 2.1 megapixel front-facing camera, a step up from the 13 megapixel camera seen on its predecessor, the Galaxy S4. On the rear-facing camera of the Galaxy Note 3, you've got a 13 megapixel camera and a single LED flash, and also the capability to record 4K video like we see on the S5. On the front, you've got a 2 megapixel front-facing camera. So first, I'm going to walk you through the camera interface on the Galaxy Note 3, and it looks a lot like what we saw on the S4 in terms of the settings. So you have the photo and video settings over there, and also just your general settings. You can access that through your gear icon on the top left corner, and there's also some of your quick toggle settings in terms of switching the camera, audio modes, video modes, and all that stuff. And you also have a ton of different modes. Just like we saw on the S4, you have the beauty face, surround shot, eraser, golf, animated photo, panorama, sport mode, sound and shot, you name it, they're all down there, and there's just so many things to pick from in terms of camera settings. Moving into the gallery, you also have quite a few different options in terms of editing your photo after you take the image. You have the rotate, crop, color, effect, portrait, sticker, and frame, which are all pretty familiar, but one thing about the Note 3 is that you can use the S Pen and really get creative, draw on your picture, and I found a lot of friends had a lot of fun with that when I brought this over to school, so that is a pretty fun feature to play with. So now onto the S5, you have a little bit of a different interface. Some things do stay pretty much the same. You still have your quick toggle settings along the side. There's just the button to switch between the cameras, and you actually have 3 slots to pick what you would like there from your settings menu. So you can just hold and drag what you may want and put it onto your quick toggle settings. I really like the grid layout actually. Instead of the menu layout, everything is just laid out in front of you, very easy to access. And in terms of modes, you still have quite a few to pick from, but actually most of them are not pre-installed. You can go and download some, but they really kind of cut down on the number of modes there. And going into the gallery, you still have a lot of the customization settings that we saw on the Note 3 in terms of editing your photo after you take it. There's just the share settings, and going into actually editing the photo, you have auto enhance, adjustment such as crop, rotate, and resize, tone, contrast, exposure, brightness, different effects, also some stuff for portrait, and also decoration if you want to get a little bit artistic. And you can also draw, however, like I said, on the Note 3, the S Pen really comes in handy. So now we're going to take a look at some actual pictures taken from both these devices, and I gotta say, the quality on both of them is just amazing, and it's actually very hard to distinguish which one actually takes the better picture. In some cases, the colors may be just slightly different in terms of the tone on both of them, but that really comes to personal preference as to which one is better. But I'd say all of them had really nice color representation, and also the clarity, of course, seen throughout. But in some cases, you will notice that the pictures taken on the Galaxy Note 3 are just ever so slightly more saturated. That's what I kind of saw. But like I said, it really comes down to personal preference as to which one you really think is better. Now moving on to the front-facing camera, the S5 has a 2.1 megapixel camera and the Note 3 has a 2 megapixel front-facing camera. I noticed that the Note 3 was a little bit more zoomed in from the same distance, and it kind of had a flatter tone while the S5 had a little bit of a better skin tone, but I think it's fair to say that neither of them really has a great front-facing camera. So now onto the video mode. I would say that both these phones really shine in this category. They're both capable of recording in 4K. Obviously the file size is going to be a little bit larger, but before the launch of the S5, the Note 3 was my go-to phone for school projects. I didn't actually do any touch focusing. I wanted to see how these phones would be able to handle near and far objects and see if they could focus in by themselves. But I can say that the S5 did have slightly better video in terms of the white balance in some cases, like you saw in the flowers. But in general, both of them are going to bring you very nice video quality, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed by either. So once again, I would say that it really comes down to personal preference as to which one you think brings a better tone or color processing between them. So I really think it's fair to say that the camera is definitely one of the stronger points of both of these phones. So when it comes to the battery of both these devices, they definitely do a very good job. On the Note 3 you have a 3200 mAh battery, and on the S5 you have a 2800 mAh battery. On the S5 you also have some things like the extreme power saving modes to really save power and maximize the usage on critical times. But with both of them I was able to get at least a day and a half, and on the Note 3 I was even able to get over 2 days in some situations. Obviously through the removable back, you were also able to access the battery and actually swap them out at any given time. So if you happen to have a spare one for the phone and you happen to run out while you're out and don't have access to a charger, you can very easily just swap out another battery, and that can definitely be very handy at times. But I'm very glad to say that the battery life on both these phones are really no problem. And on the S4 I found that the battery was absolutely terrible, but on the S5 I think they've done a really good job in improving that. So the last thing we're going to look at is the benchmarks, and obviously I always leave these to the end because, as you may have seen in my other comparison, I've stated that benchmarks really don't reflect the differences in performance between two given devices. They are really just raw scores showing the potential that the device may have through its hardware. And on the S5 you have a Snapdragon 801 processor clocked in at 2.5 GHz and 2 gigs of RAM, and on the Note 3 late last year was absolutely beastly on the spec sheet, and it still is in fact, with the Snapdragon 800 processor clocked in at 2.3 GHz and 3 gigs of RAM. But seriously, between the two processors, there obviously is a difference, but it really isn't massive at all. And you can see from the benchmark scores, the S5 has a score of 949 and 2925, and on the Note 3 have a score of 935 and 2754. So really not a huge gap in that remarks. Moving on to the Antutu benchmark, the S5 came out with a score of 36,099 and the Note 3 came out with a score of 32,545. Moving on to the Quadrant Standard benchmark, which also tests the CPU and GPU performance of a given device, they both came out in the 23,000, so really barely any difference there. So the last test we run was the 3D Mark benchmark, which tests the GPU and graphics handling of a given device. On the Note 3 we got a score of 19,152, and on the S5 I got a score of 18,332. So without a doubt, both these devices show that they can definitely handle anything you throw at it, and these benchmark scores definitely seem very impressive. Of course, Samsung in the past has been somewhat criticized for kind of cheating their benchmark scores, but from my everyday uses of both these devices, they definitely work very well and found no problem whatsoever in the performance. So now it's down to the final verdict, and you may have realized by now that these two devices definitely have tons of similarities, but still a few differences along the way. And I think the biggest decision you're going to have to make is whether you feel comfortable using the large screen size of the Note 3, whether it feels good in the hand for you, fits in your pockets. However, if you may not want such a large form factor of a device, or you may want a fingerprint sensor if that's very important for you, the S5 is going to be the best choice for you. But I'll definitely tell you that in terms of performance, both these devices performed amazingly and really had no problems in either of those categories. And also another thing to note is that the camera on both these phones are absolutely gorgeous. The 4K video recording is definitely a huge plus as well. But aside from that, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and be sure to leave a thumbs up if you did, and I'll see you all in the next one.